I'm going to present you today, first of all, the book we edited with a Lightcone edition, and we have Emmanuel Lefranc, director of Lightcone, who is here. And I want to thank him today also, because it was a great experience to work for 2 years with you. And we have gathered such a great college of contributors, like 22 contributors coming from United States, from Canada, from England, and maybe other country, Brazil and France. So the idea, the starting point was to gather kind of French way of thinking about eco-critic and eco-cinema, and an English speaker way of thinking about eco-cinema. It's kind of separated words. And so we wanted to gather them and see what could happen in this confrontation. And so you can see that in the book we published this year, Expanding Nature Ecologies of Experimental Film. So you have these contributors. Scott McDonald, I mean, I'm not going to to name everybody. You can see, but it was an honor to have someone like Scott McDonald that accept to write in the book. And I will talk a little bit about his theory of retraining perception in my presentation, and it's something really important because my personal essay in the book was about the idea of ecology of perception. So it was a main influence for me when he talked in Toward an Eco-Cinema of retraining perception, when he talked about eco-cinema films. And he talked about retraining perception, and this was something important, so I was honored that he accepted to write in the book. So maybe for me a way to enter the speculative process of the book is to talk about a chronology, like 3 times. And you will see that talking like this is a way to talk about each contributors. And a lot of contributors will be named in my presentation, and because they were also filmmakers in the book. And so you will see some extracts, and in the same time you will see that the filmmakers thought about their practice. That seems something essential. And in the same time, it was interesting in the book to see how we can share practice thought and speculative thought. And it was, I think, it was something quite interesting for our research. So I propose to mark 3 historical moments in the 60s, 70s, a rise of ecological awareness that spread to the practice of experimental film. Movie maker tends to reconnect with livelihood by the means of the film. We know that it's a particular moment, 60s, 70s, first publication of an important ecological consciousness book from Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, in 1962. And in the 70s, we have this first Global Summit conference in Stockholm, 1972, that prove an awareness about the impact of the human action on global warming, on natural human and non-human environment, talking about pollution, well-being of the population, global warming. So it was kind of a first summit talking about ecology, and it's interesting to see how it relies with the beginning of an ecological consciousness in filmmaking practices. So for this first historical moment, we'll discuss about structural materialist theory, Peter Guidal, Malcolm Legrais, linked to an ecology of perception, what I was saying before. In the second time, 80s and 90s, I propose to talk about post-materialism with an ecology of production, the emergence of film labs in Europe, and we talk about this. And in a third time, I propose to talk of the neo-materialism starting from the end of the 90s, and it opens to reflection on the ecology of the medium more particularly. So I'm proposing to share my hypothesis with you, like preliminary issues. First of all, I think for the book it was three axes that was really important for me and for Lucas Moari, my co-director. This idea of eco-materialism. In what way can the celluloid film become the seismograph, the ecological surface that examines and collects the action of nature, its agency? Eco-perception, to visit in what way contemporary practices of experimental cinema go beyond the stakes of representation of nature to go toward cooperation with livelihood. This idea of cooperation is something important for me. We'll talk about this. And philosophical and anthropological axis. Don't the practices of experimental cinema exceed the tradition of nature-culture dualism, investigating on the types of this decentering? So in the 60s, you have this theory written by few theorists. One of the main of them is Peter Guidall, working in the London Filmmaker Co-op in England. And it comes from a Marxist background, and it asking in what way does the material reality of the film, the footage, the grain, the perforations, I think sprocket holes, I think we say in English, but also the fact of showing the film fabrication process during the projection, the exposition of the film, help to unbuild the illusionism of representation. So there is a Marxist political context in structural materialist theory. So these structural tendencies start to decompose the film fabrication process and to interrogate its phenomenal foundations. The manner how every step of the film, to perceive, shoot, act directly on the footage, edit, develop, project, belongs to the material reality of the world in transformation. It seems that this materialism structural of the film of the 70s interrogates particularly the ecological qualities of visual perception. That's what I was interested in my essay, how this structural approach interrogates an ecological ontology of the act of perceiving. There is a critic, English, called Dec Duesenberg, who wrote in St. George in the Forest, published in After Image in 1976. He talks about landscape film for the first time. What is landscape film? It's a structural tendency, and we can resume it with these ideas. So landscape film is the idea to bind landscape visual perception and recording method, to put the sensual materiality of landscape at the heart of the content. The structure of the film is given by the natural elements, day lengths, winds, tides, equinox, currents, etc. So he wrote it from a London filmmaker context with a few filmmakers, but before going to London filmmaker, we have to talk about the influence of American filmmaker like Larry Gottheim and also Canadian Michael Snow, based in New York at that time, I think. So for me, one of the most important influence in landscape film is this movie called La Région Centrale, the Michael Snow, 1971. And what is interesting in his personal practice is that the devices he used before this film were most of the time in inside spaces. And in this film, he go outside and and I'm going to present you an extract and talk a little bit more about what he did in this film. Please, yeah, thank you. So here, Michael Snow, what is the device he conceived? It's a prototype of a remote-controlled pod set. It's a prototype of a remote-controlled pod set on the summit of a high mountain in a desolated region of Quebec in the north of cette île. Oh, it was really short. And he fixed a 16mm camera on the mechanical pod and related to a sinusoidal wave generator. Programmed frequencies led 360 degrees movement, zooms, and rotation depending on variable velocities and multi-axial scanning. So what is interesting in what you see in the extract is that this film opens to a new way of, for me, a new way of perceiving ecologically. It means it's because it tried to go in 360 degrees around the environment. It's like he wanted to interrogate an objectivism of perception, like to perceive is to see like everything around us, the environment totally around us. So to go back to London Filmmaker Co-op, at the beginning of the 70s, so we have few filmmakers that work in the landscape film aesthetic, and Dec de Saint-Bier was more focused on these filmmakers. So we have Chris Welsby, William Raban, John Woodman, Tony Hill, but I want to focus on Chris Welsby. And I think he was someone really important in our in the story of the book, because it was like a shock when I see his works, and he wrote in the book, and he, for me, is one of the pioneers of this ecological consciousness in filmmaking. So in the beginning of the 70s, we can feel the impact of Gregory Bateson on Chris Welsby thinking. The thought of this philosopher was to bind spirit, technology, and nature. He calls ecology of the spirit. So the ecology of the mind, according to Bateson, is the organization of the communication network that links man to the environment. This network is found in man, but also in animals and in a large ecosystem. In my opinion, his work, the work of Chris Welsby, rejoined the perception psychologist James Jerome Gibson. And he wrote The Ecological Approach to Visual Perception in 1979. And what he said in this book is that to perceive is an exploratory activity that is no longer to be studied in a laboratory. This activity of perception relates to the organism, whether human or animal, with the natural phenomena and the other living being that surround it. So he goes out of the theory, a traditional theory of visual perception that was the main theory at that time, and it was the theory of inference. We say inferences, and like you have the idea of the inferences in the psychology of perception was that visual perception is an interpretation of reality from data stored in our memory. So we are in something totally different with Gibson, because he thinks that to perceive is to collect information that are already outside of the mind. So it's a kind of a step in the thought of psychology of perception. And what is interesting, if we realize it to Chris Wellesby's work, is that his observation devices were now oriented by the climate itself and by natural forces. So I think we could make a link maybe between Gibson and Chris Wellesby's work. So here we have this first film of Chris Wellesby, Wind Vane, which is a double screen, I think. Double screen film. And it was shot in Hampstead Heath Park, London. And he set two 16mm camera on tripods, one vane fixed to each camera along a 45 degrees axis to the direction of wind. And it was like 100 feet film footage for each. So we understand that the camera is oriented by the wind, and it's like an uncontrolled device. Here we have 7 days. What a film! We screened it in Paris for the first screening of the presentation of the book. I think it was maybe the first film to be screened.
Really?
Yeah.
Open the screen.
Yeah, to open the. And 7 Day is what is the device here? It's a camera fixed on an equatorial tripod we use for astronomy, and it follows the rotation of the axis of the Earth for 7 days, from the first light to the last one. And he shot like one image for per 10 seconds, each 10 seconds. I wanted to show you Windmill 3 that we screened 2 days ago in the Cinematheque, and here it's
I think we screened Windmill 2.
You're right. You're right. So you are lucky. You are lucky. You can see the the next step. The camera here is with a lens that faces a small wind vane, and there is an adhesive mirror coating Melanex on the wind vane. So how it works with ecological perception, it works with depth, and it also with the mirror effect present an auto-reflexivity of the device that interrogates the act of perceiving. Another filmmaker at the London Filmmaker Co-op is Tony Hill, and he was particular because in his practice he used DNY devices, and for me his works also interrogate the ecology of perception. And here is to see Tony Hill, an hemispherical mirror in front of the 16mm camera suspended on top of a pole. And I can show you a little, maybe like this. Yeah, downside up from Tony Hill. here he conceives a device made of a big pendulum, which gives to make a vertical traveling of almost 360 degrees. Can go a little bit.
It should be with sound already, no?
Yes, it should be sound. I don't know why.
Is the sound jack
Yeah, I don't know if it's on.
like in the sound?
Yeah,
Goes through
We
the-
had it earlier though.
Oh,
yeah, we had sound earlier, so it's straight.
Maybe it's because it's close to the microphone.
Ah, okay. Yeah, because microphone is recording. Maybe it's.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
So it's interesting how we go down the ground with his device. And in the same idea than Michael Snow, it's a way to perceive in an objectivist way of objectivist. Okay. Don't side up. Another structuralist filmmaker is Rose Lauder, who works in France since maybe 40 years or more, 80s, 77. So the work of Rose is particular because she shoot edit in camera, and it's kind of eco-poetical weaving work that interrogates the perceptive phenomena and its persistence, thanks to frame by frame recording. And she's really a mistress of explore the manipulation possibilities of her camera Bolex H16. And in the article she wrote in the book, she says, in current cinema, the structure of a film is based on the setting of plans made to produce likelihood. This reality effect must, in order to be operating, rely on precise cinematographic convention. And one of the main conventions is indeed to consider the recording of picture according to fixed, stable frequency and continuum. That gives a reality effect that has nothing to do with the phenomenal reality. At the moment of the projection takes place a uniformization of the spectator's perceptive experience that doesn't take into account the material reality of celluloid film. Yet more thorough attention given to the celluloid band, to the photograms, its visual characteristic, to its shapes and color, to the relative position of the photogram on the band, offers to broaden the perceptive experiences to the projection. More than to broaden them, this attention offers to retrieve the possibilities that are inherent to visual perception and to adapt to different optical configurations. So we can see in Voilier et Coquelicot, 2001, we can see in Voilier et Coquelicot that she works with temporal dimension of the cutting overprint superimposition work. For a film, she makes preparatory drawings and schemes. Each case has a number and corresponds to a photogram of the celluloid band. And she was influenced in these drawings by another filmmaker, who is maybe the first structural filmmaker. That's what Malcolm Legrais used to say. He's Kurt Kren, an Austrian filmmaker, because he also worked with schemes, and after that, during the making of the film, he followed structurally the drawing or the scheme he did.
What is interesting here and kind of specific is it's not a storyboard. So she's shooting in camera, and to remember what she shot, she would like make those drawings. So there's something inverse compared to usually.
So she uses the functions rewind and play in addition to the precision of the frame counters in the Bolex. She records a series of stills at predefined intervals and leaves empty photograms. She shoots a series of pictures on one site and goes elsewhere to shoot another series of still in another site. So we have this kind of weaving of natural sites. Okay, before Scott McDonald, we gonna screen.
Sound?
No, it's silent.
It's silence. Yeah. So here's Voilier et Coquelicot. So with Rose Lauder's work appear the idea of cinematographic bouquet. She talks about bouquet. And here is an attention of to the site, where she lives, because she lives close to Avignon in Vaucluse in France. So she shot the first part, poppies, we say poppies I think for Coquelicot, was shot in the Vaucluse, and the second part was shot in Marseille where I live, in the shore, le port de Marseille, le vieux port we say in Marseille. So we have the feeling that boat is sailing on the poppies.
The image looks like crap here because it's coming from Nikon. But again, projected, it's extremely beautiful. Projected on 16.
Yeah, sorry for the...
It really makes a big difference.
Yeah, sure. Another part of this 70s structural story is the idea of an eco-meditative cinema. And Scott McDonald in the book works in a particular form and practice of filmmaking that is the long shot, film made with a single shot. And studying this kind of film for him helped him to build an important thing in his theory, which is the idea of retraining perceptions. That's what he say in the article in the book Eco-Cinematic Long Shots. I don't know if I have to read it in English for you. I think you can. But what he say, if I try to sum it up, is that in the conventional film we have perception that is made with really short plans and it's kind of cut editing, and with the long shot we are in a total different experience of time. So the long shot attention given to the site, give attention to the site and to the non-human subject, to the natural duration of the events, phenomena, and open to express a relationship between void and fullness. Okay. One of the filmmaker he studies is Larry Gottheim, and he wrote about fog line. I can show you an extract. So it's 11-minute film, and and what Gottheim say about his film, he say, for me, making a film is like opening up a veil. I'm seeing something or experiencing something, and I'm not sure what it is. Actually, during the period when I was making Blues and Fogline, I think that I was very happy to talk about mysticism or mystical things. This day, I tend to talk more about energy. Certainly, energy is a very real element in life. not just the electricity that powers light bulbs, but the life energy in people that has to do with their relationship to each other and their relationship to nature. Another important filmmaker for Scott McDonald is Peter Hutton, who made a lot of film in the Hudson River. Was influenced by the painter, the Hudson School of painting of painters. And here is an extract of Landscape for Manon. Sorry for the quality of the because and what is interesting in his films is his work on long shots and trying to let the nature and the element express themselves in the image. Maybe we can go a little bit further. Yeah. Let's go to, yeah, here it is. So it's going to be hard to have an eco-meditative experience because I want to go a little bit further in my presentation, but you have to imagine that you have like a 1 minute shot and you can see the phenomena and clouds and light, and it's really impressive. Yeah, it's a really beautiful film. Thank you. And I was interested in making a link between Peter Hutton and a French filmmaker called Philippe Cotte, who works in, like the film we saw 2 days ago in the Cinémathèque from David Dudouis. He also works in the Brittany Islands. And in this film called The Angle of the World, he had a special attention on the clouds, like Peter Hutton. I think we can find it here. Ah non, ça c'est shadow. Okay, I didn't put it here. Sorry, maybe I can. Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't have it on my.
Could it be on Lycon website?
I have it on my, but I don't know if it's so easy to. Can try. No, it's gonna be a little bit. Oh, I can try. It will. No, it will be complicated. So after this presentation of structural film, we can. We can see in the 70s, 80s a kind of post-structuralist approach. Current filmmakers revive and broaden the temporal manipulation of the camera, the long shot aesthetic, the DIY shooting devices. So after the pioneers in the 70s, we can see in a lot of filmmaking practices that they try to improve and to go deeper in this idea of long shots, devices, and DIY techniques that helps to connect with nature. And one of these filmmakers is Robert Scheller. I also talk about it in my essay, and I would have been really happy that he wrote in the book, but we had finished the table of contents, so I met him a little bit too late, but I would be really happy to share something with him. And what he did in his film In the Shadow of Marcus Mountain. On est un petit peu tôt dans le. C'est pas grave, j'en parlerai après. What he did in the Shadow of Marcus Mountain is that he conceives a handmade pinhole camera. And so he used a black box, light proof, and made with 16mm film cases in which he can make the 16mm footage manually pass in front of a tiny pinhole. So he did this DNY object to shoot. And in the Shadow of Marcus Mountain, we can see what it looks like. So he carried the pine hole and shot in the Colorado, in the mountain where he lives, and he works with these kind of glimpses. Another tendency of the material structural current is the feminist materialism. In the London Filmmaker Co-op, you have a few filmmakers, Annabelle Nicholson, Jill Utherly, Liz Rhodes, that worked with a structural approach, but in a different way. And what was special in their films or performance was that they used to investigate in a relationship between the materiality of film and their body, and the presence of a feminine craft work, and favoring of haptic experience during the recording and the performances, the haptic experience of the film himself, of the celluloid. These movie makers, as Annabelle Nicholson, Jill Utherly, Liz Rhodes, are part of a legacy of the artist Joyce Wieland, and who from the 60s placed woman craft work at the heart of her plastic work and films. And see, we can find a connection between Joyce Wieland, London filmmaker, feminist practices, and film farm practices also in Ontario, which is a great place founded by Philip Hoffman and Marianne McMahon. And it's a way to keep moving in the influence of Joyce Wieland and artisanal DIY practices, feminist craft work, and I think we can find three moments. And one of the contributors of the book, Kim Knowles, wrote about this and transposed to today the question of materialist policy of the film. And she found that it's a new echo of eco-critical value. She opens in her book Experimental Film and Photochemical Practices, published in 2020, another path to this materialism, starting from the corporal practices of these English feminist filmmakers. She indicates in the films, unfortunately seldom commented, filmmakers like Annabelle Nicholson, Liz Rhodes, Jill Utherly, Marilyn Alford have several new engagements with the materiality of film. What she says: by formulating this haptic engagement as a form of resistance and by implying the film surface in a kind of sensual communication, we append vital perspective to the political potential of materialist film. This potential is rooted in the capacity of film to create new perceptive hierarchies and visual experiences. The question is therefore not so much to know if a material engagement is capable of new post-Guidal type of policy, but what form it takes in a social, economic, environmental, and technological landscape that is as changing. So Kim Knowles put us on the path of another materialist approach that would try to answer the context of the Anthropocene and new climate regime, as Bruno Latour says. These women filmmakers of the London Filmmaker Co-op would make the practice of experimental cinema enter a moment of post-materialism. In the 80s, we have this moment of post-materialism, and what is interesting is that it's the emergence of practices of direct film practices without camera, directly on the film, on the celluloid, and manipulation of the emulsion of the film. Also, this little layer you have on the surface of the celluloid. So Stan Brakhage has done Most Lights in '63, but I want to talk more about the Garden of Earthly Delights he done in 1981. And he was interested in how the selected substances are generally translucid. The organic substances he collected are translucid, to examine the passage of light in the organic and synthetic cellulose of the film. And he was trying to link this translucent organic material with the light of the celluloid. And here for the Garden of Earthly Delights, he tapes organic material on the footage, seeds, flowers, leaves, and transform the material space of the film in a place of collection, picking of the most minuscule lighting realities. Okay, sorry, I just have to would go deeper in the film because and so I'm going. I don't know what time do I have to. Jasmine? Maybe.
I think you have.
Okay, so.
And maybe it would be good to have some time for questions.
For questions, maybe 10 minutes, something like this. Okay. And in this post-materialist practices, you also have alchemist filmmakers. So you have collecting filmmakers. You also have alchemist filmmakers like Nathaniel Dorsky, who has worked with emulsion in 1983 in this film Pneuma. And one of the important filmmakers on this work with emulsion is Jürgen Rebleu. In Instabile Materie, 1995, he composed from the shim of elementary particles, neutron, photon, graviton, etc. The content of the film is made of shapes, the result from the direct opposition on the emulsion of sodium chloride crystals and colored materials. So in this film, we enter in a new way of conceiving the process of filmmaking, because the process of manipulation and experimentation are associated in the final form of the film to the biochemical processes. So there is a link made between the process of making film and the process of biology itself. And the third period is from the end of the 90s to today, and I propose to call it a neo-materialism. And what is so particular, and we used to talk about it with Emmanuel Lefranc, is because you also have lived maybe this period, is that in the 90s there were this emergence in France and Europe of film labs and of new places dedicated to the conservation and practice of experimental film, but more precisely with photochemical film. And so we are in the 90s in a digital turning point that enhancing photochemical film and its materiality. That's what Kim Knowles used to say. So it's a kind of eco-critical and eco-media context where the digital turning point give the idea to the filmmaker to go back to a photochemical film. So here we have this proposition of Pip Chodorov, one of the most influenced filmmaker and artist-run film lab of France, and he wrote this article, The Artist-Run Film Lab, and he proposed to say that in the 90s, when the film labs emerged, we go out of an economy, industrial economy of production of film, to enter an ecology of production. And what Kim Knowles says about this eco-critical and eco-media context is that at the beginning of the year 2000, the primacy of digital technology revived an interest for the real support of silver footage, only one capable of recording the subtle traces of the movie maker's hand, along with other types of physical contact. It stands out of this new picture creation forms to rethink cinema in a digital era. So in the 90s we have a true appearance of ecology of medium also, and ecology of production. So what are the idea of ecology of production in the film lab and the way they are structured is to replace a production economy by political ecology thinking. An idea of decreasing the film labs as convivial, collectivist places based on the sharing of knowledge and skills. Also places of pioneer craftwork revival, of the renewal of a taste for process and tool and material manipulating, and an interest in camera, celluloid, editing table on tools and material in a convivial way, as Ivan Illich used to talk about conviviality. And emerging from the 90s to until today, we have an ecology of medium that is appearing in the practices of experimental film, and which is linked in a philosophical way to neo-materialism. So what is neo-materialism? It's since the end of the 90s, it's new metaphysics that try to liberate itself from the matter-spirit dualism. And the body and matter seems to be animated by an autonomous capacity of acting, an agency, out of any spirit intentionality. What will be transposed to ecological experience on film materiality? In what is the celluloid composed of organic substances, cellulose, minerals, gelatin, photosynthesis? can celluloid activate agentivities, intra-action of the living beings on a molecular level? And intra-action is an idea developed by Karen Barad in her agential realism. And she substitutes the idea of interaction at a molecular level, assuming a causal relationship, that of interaction. So it's not a causality. Interaction is like events happen in the same time, and we can think them differently than causality. Something before, something after. In interaction, like life in is molecular relations are happening in the same time, and time and space, everything shared in the same time. Maybe I will go a little bit. So in this investigation on the ecology of medium, we have cultivating filmmakers that propose to use the film to do experiences and on the material, and so they propose landfill, submergence, deposit. We have here a short list of experiences of landfill and what I wrote, so submergence and deposit. David Gatton, Emmanuel Lefranc in Underground. What the Water Said is submergence of the film. Underground and Landfill 16 are landfills. And the Wilderness series from Karel Duing is something really interesting, because he works with tiny organic materials to deposit it on the film like it was a layer of the ground, and it's really interesting. I don't know if I will have time to show you extract. So here is Underground. We have seen it yesterday, the first film of Emmanuel Lefranc, who was buried in different places. We can see how the bacteria will interact with the emulsion and tint the emulsion of the film. Here is Landfill 16 from Jennifer Weaves. She buried it in her own dump in Indiana. And after that, she painted it manually, each photographs of the film. So here we have contact techniques also. I'm going to go a little bit further because we only have 2 minutes. And I wanted to open this presentation at the end on the idea of going toward a multinaturalist cinema, which is a more anthropological idea. And we talk about ecology and try to propose like several ecologies: ecology of medium, ecology of production, ecology of perception. So the plural idea of ecology does not seem to take into account the diversity of ways of feeling and perceiving the living, human or non-human. Ecological thought tends to enclose the fact of renewing a link with the living in a Western epistemological fortress, a vision finally anthropocentric of the nature from which one would have moved away and whose link would have been broken. So I think the idea of multinaturalism, developed by an anthropologist Brazilian, Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, is interesting in the way it goes further than ecology. And what is so-called multinaturalism? Here is what says Viveros de Castro in Cannibal Metaphysique. Multiculturalism supposes a diversity of subjective and partial representation, incidental to an external nature, one and total, indifferent to representation. The Amerindians propose the opposite. Any being that will occupy the position of a cosmological subject is human. Any existence can be thought of as thinking, that is, as activated or arranged by a point of view. Perspectivism is multinaturalism, for a perspective is not representations. A little bit complicated, but in summary, we can say that you have two different conceptions of one is Occidental conception, naturalism, and is the naturalists believe that only human beings are endowed with subjectivity, but that they are identical to non-human beings through the similarity of biological body. Human, animal, plants, we are connected with the biological body, but we have different subjectivity. Multinaturalism is different. A multinaturalist could consider that all living beings have a particular point of view, a particular body, and that each cosmological subject is linked by a common native myth. So the same spirit, but different bodies. And few questions to conclude on this idea of multinaturalism. How filmmaking practices can go beyond the idea of an ecology? Or rather, how can the idea of ecology become sufficiently malleable to accommodate a plurality of ways of inhabiting the living and of exchanging between the living? How can ecology free itself from its cultural anchorage? Wouldn't experimental film from its ecology help to decentralize a dominant human gaze in order to welcome other point of view? So we have few anthropologists of nature who were really important in this discussion of decentralize our dominant human point of view, like Philippe Descola, Bruno Latour, Isabelle Stengers, Eduardo Viveros de Castro. And so I would like to propose three hypotheses to conclude, and just before screening a little extract of the last film. The animated images would have an animist background. They would reanimate the living. The experimental film could be a multinaturalist device by putting on the same plane of immanence a plurality of cosmological point of view. The possibilities of recording, of contact, of editing of the photochemical film by resuming the biosemiotic hypothesis of Eduardo Kohn could form a semiotic network composed of living signs, a set of human and non-human manifestations taken in a continuous audiovisual relational process. And I want to show you a film made by a Spanish filmmaker called Gabriel Stigman Mongrané. And it's interesting because he shot it in the Mata Atlântica, the rainforest of Brazil. He designed a zip line and a motorized device from which a 60mm camera is suspended, and you will see what is the result. C'était là. Okay. 16mm. We don't have the sound. It's important to have it here. Maybe I could. Without the sound, it's difficult. Maybe because you're recording, no?
Vas-y.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.